One big problem facing modern horror filmmakers is that the genre's fans are one hell of a savvy bunch, having seen potentially hundreds if not thousands of horror films over the years, and therefore being able to sniff out a serial killer reveal a mile away. It's always impressive then when a horror film can genuinely pull the wool over our eyes and deliver an unmasking that serves as a genuine shock. And over the many decades of classic horror, these are assuredly the ones that landed with the greatest surprise. These 10 horror movie killer reveals were guessed by basically nobody because they so keenly toyed around with viewer expectations, covered their own tracks, and did things audiences simply weren't conditioned to anticipate at the time. It's a tough trick to pull off without getting into deeply contrived territory or not playing fair with the audience, and so it's little surprise that it's so rare for horror movie killers to be so genuinely unpredictable. And yet, one way or another, these movies all delivered some of the most jaw-droppingly left-field killer revealed that none of us anticipated. I'm Sean Ferry for What Culture Horror, and here are 10 movies where nobody guessed the killer. Number 10, Roman Bridger, Scream 3. Scream 3 may be the consensus worst entry into the franchise, but it still delivers a genuinely jolting killer reveal when we find out that, for the first time in the series, Ghostface is a solo operator, and more to the point, it's Stab 3 director Roman Bridger. There are two reasons why most fans didn't pin the murders on Roman. First off, who could ever have anticipated that Roman would actually be Sidney Prescott's secret half-brother, born to her mother Maureen? Holy retcon, Batman! And secondly, there's the fact that Roman fakes his death earlier in the movie, in a manner so persuasive as to steer all suspicion away from him. Gale discovers his corpse inside a prop coffin covered in blood with a knife protruding from his chest, and even checks his pulse to confirm that yes, he's no more. Except Roman inexplicably reappears later to reveal that he was the bad guy all along. A reveal that's unpredictable precisely because the movie makes it near impossible to guess through its sheer implausibility. It's never explained how Roman could exist without a pulse, but there are a few deeply silly options here. He either took a sedative to slow his heart rate down to near death, used an extremely convincing prop of his own dead body, or Gale simply couldn't find his pulse in her panic. It's some of the flimsiest writing in any of the Scream movies, but at least served its contrived purpose in preventing fans from figuring out that Roman was the killer. Number 9, Emma Spool, Psycho 2. Though Psycho 2 was rubbished by critics and most fans at the time of its release, reception to it has certainly warmed over time, as folk finally found themselves able to accept it on its own terms rather than endlessly compare it to Alfred Hitchcock's peerless original. Set 22 years after the first film, Psycho 2 sees an apparently cured Norman Bates returning to the Bates Motel after being released from a mental institution, only for bodies to start piling up once again. Naturally, the audience is led to suspect Norman himself of committing these crimes, but the film's climax reveals the culprit is actually waitress Emma Spool, who additionally reveals herself to be Norman's biological mother, her motive harming anyone who dared to torment her son following his release. Given the dicey potential of fiddling with the original film's legacy by revealing that the woman who raised Norman actually was his aunt, it's impressive how well this all works, and you certainly won't see the ending coming. Number 8, Marta Manganiello, Deep Red. Giallo movies and totally batshit killer reveals you couldn't possibly figure out? Name a more iconic duo. And few have ever done it better than Dario Argento's sublime Deep Red, which revealed that the shadowy killer wasn't any of the reasonable suspects, but actually Carlo's eccentric mother Marta all along. And this gets even better, as it's subsequently revealed that the movie actually hid this truth literally in front of our faces the entire time. Early in the film, it's possible to see Marta's face briefly reflected in a mirror as protagonist Marcus Daly arrives at the scene of the first murder. But it's just fleeting enough to be missed by most on an initial viewing. And even if you did see the face, you probably assumed it was a painting or, well, anything but an honest-to-God reveal of the killer's identity, because what filmmaker in their right mind would do something so brazen? Number 7, Marie, High Tension. Just for a change, let's talk about High Tension. Because not all shock killer reveals are in any way good. We have the infamously ridiculous twist of High Tension. From the bulk of its runtime, Alexandra Aja's film seems like a simple slasher flick in which two female students, Marie and Alexia, are on the run from a vicious serial killer. It doesn't appear that the killer's identity is really the point of the film, with Aja instead focusing on gory kills and suspense. That is until the absurd twist reveals that the killer was actually Marie all along, and we've been seeing the story unfold from her dissociated perspective, where she imagines another person doing the gnarly deeds instead. It's certainly a surprise, that's for sure, though given that there's basically no way for the audience to guess this reveal ahead of time, many found it deeply unsatisfying, especially as it causes the film's sense of internal logic to swiftly collapse in on itself. Number 8, Dr. Robert Elliott, Dressed to Kill. We spend most of Brian De Palma's Dressed to Kill believing that Kate Miller's murderer is a tall blonde woman who wields a razor, later revealed to be Bobby, a transgender patient of psychiatrist Dr. Robert Elliott. Except the final sequence reveals that Elliott actually is Bobby. More to the point, Elliott wishes to transition, but an alternative personality prevents that from occurring. And, as the film so clumsily rationalizes, whenever a woman sexually arouses Elliott, it causes the unstable Bobby portion of his personality to feel threatened and, as exemplified by what happened to Kate, lash out violently. While Dressed to Kill's legacy is certainly complicated today by understandable accusations of adhering to transphobic tropes, the reveal does nevertheless retain a punchiness through its sheer unexpectedness, especially for a film released in 1980. Certainly, nobody expected the killer to be Michael Caine all along. Number 5. Nobody. April Fool's Day. April Fool's Day pulled quite a big one over on audiences, and though the movie's title should have led them to expect some tomfoolery, arriving in an era where seasonal slasher films were all the rage, it was also easy to assume it was simply a catchy title for marketing purposes. And so, after the bodies have piled up throughout the movie, we finally learn that none of it actually happened for real. So there's really no killer to speak of. Rather, each of the kills was staged by Muffy, with the cooperation of her victims, as she intends to turn her family's mansion into a horror-themed resort, and this was basically a rehearsal. It's certainly a divisive twist that continues to polarize audiences to this day, with some finding amusement in how flagrantly on the nose it is, and others feeling like their 89 minutes have been wasted by such an intentionally deflating reveal. Number 4. Luke. Better Watch Out. Better Watch Out is a movie best watched as blind as possible, centered around babysitter Ashley as she attempts to protect the kid she's sitting for, Luke, and his best friend Garrett, from a murderous home invader. But, as it turns out, the entire scenario is a fantasy cooked up by Luke, a fake home invasion in which he attempted to depict himself as Ashley's savior in order to win her affection. It's only after this that Luke actually becomes a killer, slaughtering Ashley's boyfriend and ex-boyfriend when they try to make the save, before eventually turning on Garrett when he also tries to help Ashley escape. It's a brilliant mid-film twist that comes totally out of nowhere, and yet feels totally believable thanks to Levi Miller's diabolical performance as Luke. What initially seemed like a typical Christmas-themed slasher flick was ultimately so much more than that. Number 3. Brenda Bates. Urban Legend. The criminally underappreciated Urban Legend does a superb job of leading the audiences to believe that the killer will most likely be a man. The parka-wearing assailant certainly seems to carry themselves like a man physically, and so it comes as quite the surprise when they eventually reveal themselves to be Brenda Bates, who is seeking revenge for the death of her boyfriend in a car accident caused by protagonist Natalie. The film also does a sly job of steering suspicion away from Brenda early on, as immediately following the unforgettable opening kill scene, we cut to Brenda and her friends hanging out. The editing seems to imply that these scenes are taking place close together, and so we're immediately less suspicious of everyone in the scene, including Brenda, even though the time frame is never actually confirmed one way or another. Number 2. There wasn't one. Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. Bodies, Bodies, Bodies revolves around a group of young friends who begin turning on one another once they realize a serial killer is in their midst. It all begins when David, the owner of the mansion where everyone is staying, is found with his throat slashed by a kukri, and it's not long before paranoia causes more bodies to begin piling up. But the hilarious climactic rug pull is that, after inciting us to try and figure out who the devious killer is for 90 minutes, it turns out there isn't one after all. Rather, survivors B and Sophie find a video on David's phone which reveals he accidentally slit his own throat while trying to open a champagne bottle with said kukri, all for a TikTok video. So the entire night of bloodshed was catalyzed by a dumb accident, a ludicrously sneaky outcome to its central whodunit. Number 1. Anne Thomerson. Happy Birthday to Me. 1981's slasher film Happy Birthday to Me made us all believe that the killer was Ginny Wainwright, seemingly driven crazy by a traumatic past event in which none of her school's most popular students attended her birthday party, leading to an accident which caused her mother's death. But the big twist reveals that, in fact, Ginny isn't the killer at all. It's her best friend, Anne, who has been wearing an elaborate latex mask to disguise herself as Ginny while committing the murders. Furthermore, Anne reveals that her father had an affair with Ginny's mother and that the duo are therefore half-sisters. And because this isn't a wild enough battery of surprises for an ending, Ginny then kills Anne moments before the police show up, with the implication being that Ginny will almost certainly be blamed for all of the deaths throughout the story.